Hello, one and all. We're hanging out with my longtime friend and partner in crime, Caleb Maupin. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with Caleb, with the one and only Caleb Maupin. Let's hear it, folks. And we're going to get going. Oh, well, there's news on the Tomahawk, so we got to get a word from Zelensky. What do you have to say, Vladimir Zelensky? I don't think he's happy, Caleb. I don't think he's happy. And we're about to talk about why. We're going to tell you about the use of anyone who's been living under a rock and doesn't know who Caleb Maupin is. I'm sure there may be one person on this earth, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to go over his website and how you can follow Caleb and all of his good works and be a part of it. But first, we got a couple of things we're going to hit. So we're going to do that later on. Let's start with this. Now, I think it's interesting because the discussion of tomahawks was there. And I got to say, our dear friend Ray McGovern said, ain't no tomahawks. No tomahawks are coming. You can forget that. You can forget tomahawks. And he said that all along, not happening. And then a lot of people went into how hard it is to fire them and all that. Let's see what Donald Trump, the latest on Trump. U.S. won't fire tomahawks. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of his quotes that seems to point to Ray was always right. Quote from Trump. The problem with the tomahawk is that it'll take a minimum of 6 months, usually a year, to learn how to use them. They're highly complex, Trump said. So the only way a tomahawk is going to be shot is if we shot it, and we're not going to do that. He says, we know how to use it. Now, listen to this. This tells you about the future. We know how to use it, and we're not going to be teaching other people, Trump added. Trump earlier cautioned that allowing Ukraine to conduct deep strikes into Russia with long-range missiles could lead to an escalation. So there we have it. We know how to use them, and we're not going to be teaching other people. The only way it's going to be a tomahawk is going to be shot is if we shot it, and we ain't going to do that. So it sounds to me like the door on tomahawks are slammed shut. And actually, listening to that, I don't think they were ever open. Anyway, your thought, tomahawks, Caleb Maupin.
Well, this is certainly a good development. I'm not thrilled, though, to see that the meeting in Budapest is canceled, and I'm certainly not thrilled also that they've put new sanctions onto Russia, onto the oil companies, and this game of start and stop that Trump is doing with Russia. I mean, he said he was going to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. It's been quite a long, time since then, since he took office. So, I mean, I can only hope that things will improve. The negotiations. Look, my feeling is that we need to do everything we can to support the negotiations and push for an end to the conflict. And, I think Scott Ritter makes a really good point when he says that look, Putin can't just end the war where it currently is, where the battle lines currently are, because of the Russian Constitution, right? Because these territories are now part of the Russian Federation, the new republics in the Constitution. And, it's like the president of the United States can't sign away California, and he can't just like meet with a world leader and say, all right, California, you can have it. No, I mean that if you're debating where the borders of a country are, that's a constitutional procedure. And that makes sense, right? And that the people of the Donbass regions, they were asking for Russia to protect them for 8 years. Russia finally moved in and protected them. And now, there is, at this point, a large amount of the territory of the Donbass is under Russian control, but not all of it. And, and that for Russia to just end things here, that's not something the Russian president could just do arbitrarily. And that makes sense that, the Russian Federation has clear borders. So I don't see anything there. One thing that I will point out, right, is that, when I was there for the Russian election that happened in 2018. I was also there for the more recent election in 2024. And in both of those elections, every inch of Russian territory, the people living there got to vote. In America, if you live in if Guam, if you live in Puerto Rico, if you live in the U.S. Virgin Islands, if you don't get to vote. You don't get to vote for the president. You don't have any electoral college representation. But no matter where you are in the Russian Federation, no matter what republic, if you live there, and you're a citizen, you can vote. It should be worth pointing out. I mean, there are big chunks of America where millions of people live, and they have no say in who our president is. I mean, isn't that a bit of an outrage? And you can imagine if Russia was doing that, if there was a big chunk of Russia that had no say in whether or not Putin was the president, they would bring that up endlessly. So, it's important to point this out. There are no territories in Russia. You're either a republic or you're not part of Russia, right? Everyone in Russia is part of a republic that has a vote, in determining the leadership of the country.
Well, yeah, and I would argue that there are vast areas in the United States where you really don't get a say in who runs the country. All of it.
Well, yeah.
By the time they end up stealing it from Biden, steals it from whoever, and of course, the media ends up, convincing us of absurdities. How much do we really get an opportunity? I don't know. Although one could argue that the Republicans chose Trump, whether you like them or not. The Republican, I mean, even if they were misled or lied to, the Republicans wanted Trump. The Democrats were bamboozled because really they wanted Bernie. I mean, we could criticize Bernie, but that was the one they wanted, and they got robbed by the machine. So at any rate, as we move forward, I know a big article, a big story. I don't want to go any further. We got lots of things to talk about.
Sure.
But as soon as my stop spinning.
Yeah, you're frozen there.
We got to talk about this one.
Yeah, I hear your voice, but you're frozen. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully Garland's back soon.
Try to open. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can hear
you. How about now? Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, all good.
Okay. Yeah, my machine was acting weird. Hey, you know what I'd say? Those guys in Langley got to eat too. You know what I mean? They're busy. They got to make a living. So let's do what we want to talk about. John Brennan, a low-life scumbag who was at the heart. I tried to let's see. There we go. Let's try this. What happened was I tried to put up a page, but you know how some of these pages, they'll have like a million video advertisements and it locks up your machine. So that was my problem. All right. Okay, here we go. Let's get somewhere with this. House Republicans refer Obama CIA Director John Brennan for criminal prosecution. They say he lied to Congress about the investigation into whether Russia intervened in the 2016, right? Let's see. He made false statements. He lied to Congress. They referred him to the Justice Department. Specifically, Jordan said in his letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi that evidence newly declassified by the NIA, Director of National Intelligence, that's Tulsi Gabbard, confirms that Brennan falsely testified on May 11, 2023, when he said, quote, the CIA was not involved at all with the Steele dossier. You know something? To quote the weapons of mass destruction, his case is a slam dunk because he damn sure said that. And absolutely, we knew then, you and I knew, that the CIA was involved, but the evidence could completely come out now. This is a case. It don't get any easier than this. Your thoughts on John Brennan?
Well, first of all, what you said there is totally correct. I mean, for him to claim that the Steele dossier, that the CIA was not involved with it, which they clearly were, that the report that claimed that Russia was involved in helping Trump in the elections didn't base itself on the Steele dossier when documents show it clearly did. They caught him lying. But in terms of background on John Brennan, right? So you remember when John Brennan was first appointed by Obama, it was a scandal because he lied to Congress back then about drones. Do you remember this? Right?
Yep.
They asked him, is the USA conducting drone strikes in certain countries when he was being confirmed? And he said, no, we're not. And it turned out they were. And he was not prosecuted for that because they said, oh, he's protected. That was classified or something like that. But he misrepresented the drone program to the U.S. Congress, and that there was a huge amount of outrage from Republicans when he was picked, because it's widely understood, I mean, not 100% confirmed, that he's a Muslim, right? And that's very interesting. So he was the head of the CIA bureau in Saudi Arabia for most of the 1990s. He was like the head of CIA operations in Saudi Arabia. And apparently Mecca, right, the holy city of Mecca, where all the Muslims go for the Hajj, is a really, really important intelligence spot. And so one version of events is, Saudi law is you cannot go into Mecca unless you convert to Islam. So he got a bunch of CIA guys together and they went into a room with an imam and they said, all right, what do we have to do? Just tell us the words to say or whatever. And they said, okay, now you're Muslims. And then they went into Mecca. That's one version of events. However, there are other questions there. The thing that was widely pointed out is, that movie Zero Dark 30 came out. Now, that movie, it lied about history. It was about the killing of Osama bin Laden, and it made it look like Osama bin Laden was captured or killed through torture, right? That they tortured somebody to get the information. And the CIA came forward and said, that's not how we got him. And the film was just like an advertisement for torture, basically. They fictionalized history to make torture look good, which was very disturbing. A lot of human rights organizations were disturbed by that. And then John Brennan, as CIA director, he made a really big show of kind of grandstanding that he doesn't believe in torture. If Obama ever asked him to torture, he would step down as CIA director. He doesn't believe in torture. He hates torture, which really means that he's from the faction of the CIA that doesn't want America to be known as a torturing country.
Right.
Whereas Gina Haspel and the Bush faction, they want America to be known as a torturing country, like fear. They want our enemies to fear us, whereas he wants America to look like Mr. Nice Guy or whatever. But then that movie Zero Dark 30 came out, right? While he was CIA director, made it look like Osama bin Laden was captured through torture. In that movie, there's a scene where they're in Langley, the CIA headquarters, and they pan over the office of a high-ranking CIA officer who has a prayer mat out, a rug, and he's doing, the Islamic prayers. And many people thought that was the creators of that film, who obviously were pro-torture and didn't like Brennan, quietly outing him as a Muslim. Now, that's very interesting to me. And I find the whole thing fascinating. The other thing about John Brennan, though, if he was the CIA director in Saudi Arabia for decades, think about Osama bin Laden, who is the wealthiest family in Saudi Arabia is the bin Laden family with a state monopoly on construction, right? Think about how, the Mujahideen of Afghanistan that we were arming to fight the Soviet Union, that were pouring acid on women's faces for not wearing veils and executing people for teaching women to read. They would hang, literacy volunteers from the Soviet Union. And, this is a guy who was involved in some pretty nasty, evil shit. You know what I mean? As the CIA director based in Saudi Arabia, he wasn't just having dinner with the prince. Somebody told me Saudi Arabia is a really nice place, that when you go to visit a prominent Saudi family, they kill a camel to welcome you, right? That eating a camel is kind of an honorary thing. It's like kill a camel, but he was doing more than eating a camel, right? He was overseeing some pretty nasty stuff. Saudi Arabia and the Wahhabis, people talk about the Wahhabi death squads. That's ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and all these groups that the USA used against the Chechnya to break Chechnya away from Russia, in Afghanistan and other places, right? Saudi Arabia is kind of the center of Wahhabism. So he was the CIA guy who was in charge of all of this, may have converted to Islam or not, not clear, but it's widely understood that he at least went through the motions to convert to Islam, right? The other thing is, while he was leaving office, he said the first time he ever voted, he voted for the Communist Party. In 1976 was his first presidential election, and he was a young rebel, young man with long hair or whatever. So to stick it to the man, he voted for the Communist Party, and that got a laugh. Like that was his laugh line as he was outgoing. That's John Brennan, John Brennan represents the Obama faction of the CIA. And it makes sense that, he was formerly, in Saudi Arabia, that, because that was a big part of the Obama policy, was cultivating like Muslim extremists to fight enemies of the United States. So he would know about that, having been based in Saudi Arabia. So he's an interesting character. As far as this indictment, look, they lied. Russiagate was a lie. Russia did not interfere to help Trump win the elections. They did the opposite. They could have if they wanted to, right? Tulsi Gabbard has released the files. You read those files, they had the goods on Hillary Clinton like you wouldn't believe. That Hillary Clinton was addicted to painkillers. She was like a drug addict, right? She was having mental health meltdowns and stuff. And the Russians had recordings of her having psychotic meltdowns. They had people on her staff exchanging emails about her drug addiction issue and all kinds of stuff. If Russia had really wanted to help Trump win, they would have just had to come out with that, and Trump would have won hands down, right? And part of the reason Hillary Clinton lost is she covered up her health problems. She said she had no health issues, and then she collapsed, right, at the 9/11 ceremony. It's like, wait, she has no health issues and she's just fainting like that. What's going on here? And, you know, so if they had come out with that, she would have been done, but they sat on it, and they didn't, and they expected Hillary Clinton would win. So Russia did not interfere in the elections, and twice the intelligence community was asked, they asked James Clapper, who was the director of national intelligence. They asked James Clapper to assemble a report, and 2 times they came back, and all the intelligence agencies said Russia is not trying to help Trump. Russia didn't interfere. And the 3rd time, right before he was leaving office, Obama said, we're really looking for a different answer. Can you fix this? And then they came up with a report. They had no evidence, and so they got this Steele dossier from Britain, the PP tape, that whole thing that was completely ridiculous. And now it shows that senior CIA officials said this isn't real. This is not legit. We shouldn't include this. And John Brennan said, no, we're going to include it. And James Comey also said, overruled, we're going with it. Then they call him before Congress and they ask him, now, was this claim, was it based on this totally discredited Steele dossier? Is that what you based this on? Oh, no, we didn't base it on that. Well, we've got, this is open shut. He committed perjury. He lied before Congress, contempt of Congress, perjury, obstruction of justice. It seems pretty blatant. I don't know on what basis he thinks he's going to fight this. There's some of these other cases you could argue maybe it's a technicality. He lied about this not once, but 3 different times. It's a lie.
And guess what else? They have it in writing documented. Him talking about including the Steele dossier in the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment of 2017, that one, right? So he went to Congress and said, oh, no, I didn't use that. But in writing, he literally wrote down, we got to use it. And they got it. Yeah. That's one where your lawyer says, you better plead out on this one, brother. Your lawyer says, you better plead out on this one. But let me say this, Caleb. Here's what I think. If you remember, why wouldn't he lie to Congress? James Clapper lied to Congress. Are you spying on Americans? He was in charge of the NSA. Oh, yeah. And when they found out he was, and they asked him, why'd you lie to Congress? Say that to Congress. And his answer was, it was the least untruthful thing that I could say. If you remember, when Brennan was in Congress, the least untruthful. And let's not forget, when they were looking into torture, Brennan's CIA, do you recall this? They tapped they hacked into the computers of the Senate Intelligence Community. Senate Intelligence Committee. The CIA hacked into their computers to find out what they were doing and then lied to Congress and said they didn't do it. So, of course, Brennan would lie to Congress. Of course, Clapper would lie to Congress because they knew the truth. At that time, there was a truth. The truth was, if you were part of the machine, you could lie to Congress all you want and nobody would ever hold you accountable. But there was one problem. And it's a problem Letitia James is facing. A lot of these people were facing. If you shoot at the king, you better kill him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you swing at the king, you better knock him out. Because if you miss, he's coming back.
Yeah.
And when they went after Trump and they charged him with everything but exposing himself to a blind person, that's about the only thing they didn't charge him to, right? But they didn't get him. They charged him with everything. They literally changed the law in New York so one woman could sue Donald Trump. And when they changed the law and they got rid, because the woman who wanted to sue Donald Trump for sexual harassment or something, the statute of limitations had passed. So they changed the law so that the statute of limitations would be there was a window like 30 days or whatever, where, okay, you won't have to worry about that. And within that night, it was like 12 midnight that the law changed, and like 12:01, she filed her lawsuit against Trump. So the bottom line was this: they did everything they could to take out Trump. We're going to politically kill him. And when they didn't, that means that he's coming for you. And that's all this is now. Letitia James, you ran, we'll get Trump, and you tried to get him. Brennan, oh, we're going to take Trump out, and you tried. But when you try to take out the king and you don't take out the king, I learned that in law enforcement. You know, it was like I was in the senior command staff, and I understood this. If somebody's going after the chief of police, he better be gone afterwards. Because if you try to take out the chief of police and he ain't gone, woe be to you. You are going to pay back. He's going to make an example out of you, right?
Sure.
That's all they're dealing with now. They went after Trump, and the things that they would have gotten away with, there ain't going to be no mercy for him, nor should there be, in my opinion. No, you took that chance. You stuck your neck out. I'm going to try to take out the president. You know how the power game is played. You didn't take him out. Now he's coming for you. Time to pay the piper. That's the way I see it. Hey, you know what? Fair is fair. My dad used to say it. Even swap ain't no swindle. You took a chance. You missed. Now you will pay the price, and Trump is going to make an example out of these people, and he should, because they're guilty.
Yeah, well, I mean, this no kings stuff is absurd. It's absolutely crazy, right? I mean, it was a big mobilization with no message other than we don't like Trump. He has too much power. Stop Trump. Somebody said it was kind of an anti-FDR rally. I mean, the message was we don't want strong leadership. I am quite critical of Trump. He's done not a great job so far. I mean, going after Palestine students, he said he was going to protect free speech, didn't do that. Said he was going to end the wars, didn't do that. Bombed Iran, hasn't ended the Ukraine war. Backing Israel. I mean, there's plenty that we can disagree with, but for Trump to do good, he would have to be stronger. You need a stronger leader to do good, right? So we would want a stronger president who would stand up to the powers that be. And, this message, this anti-authoritarianism is basically just saying we want leadership that'll just roll over and let our de facto rulers, the deep state, the people that already have the money, et cetera, we'll just let them be in charge. And it's just completely misdirected. It's like Kamala Harris calling for the titans of industry to remove Trump and stand up to Trump. She wants the corporations to get together and oust Trump. I mean, it was just a defense of the political status quo. Yeah.
Oh, just threw this out there because you're talking about no kings. For people that don't understand, these are the people who put it together. Leah, arch Zionist, of course, Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin. These are the executive directors behind indivisible.org. There's the people. If you're there going and you're going to take out, I don't know who did what they're, but if you're for no kings, and I guess probably Zionism too, you're going to love the executive directors of No Kings, Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin. And in fact, at their first No Kings, whatever you call it, protest, they literally had a sign that said "Hands off NATO."
Yes, it was one of the demands, official demands. The hands off.
Official demand of them was hands off NATO.
Yeah, no, and I mean those two look rather young, but this will be a great resume builder for them. I feel like they're not even really in charge of it. It was just like who do we put on the website, and then they can like put on there. I was the director of No Kings. They both look very, very young. Let me just put it that way. And I think they're young, aspiring political people who got a title. And I have a feeling there's other people running. I mean, it was a Democratic Party rally, basically. I know, it's interesting because Fox News is making such a big deal out of the fact that the Communist Party USA signed on to it. And it's just like the Communist Party USA, they are so weak. And yeah, it's just like they just campaign for Democrats. They've been doing that for years. And it's like, did they have a contingent? Did any of them show up? Did they? I mean, it's just, it's like it's a post office box, basically, at this point, a post office box and some buildings that are always empty. I mean, it's, and it's like they're making it sound, Fox is crazy. I will say, though, that November 5th in Washington, D.C., the Refuse Fascism organization, they're going to have like all this big civil disobedience. They're calling for like surround the White House, all this stuff. That's the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Maoists, right? And refusefascism.org, they're having their big thing. And that organization, very interesting. That organization, they started out as like pro-China communists. They cut ties with China in 1976 when Mao died. They didn't like Deng Xiaoping. So then when Deng Xiaoping came to the White House in 1979, when the USA and China officially established diplomatic relations, they penetrated White House grounds, and 2 of their members got press credentials to get into the White House. And they took little red books out of their bags and ran at Deng Xiaoping with their little red books, got tackled by the Secret Service and got arrested. And their leader then fled to France. Hundreds of them were arrested. There was like rioting outside the White House. Their rally was called Death to Deng Xiaoping was the name of their rally. And their leader then fled to France, and they were then directed from France for decades. Their leader, Bob Avakian, he applied for political exile status in France, didn't get it, but he remained in the country under undisclosed terms. And they were directed from France for many decades. And while they were in France, they took on causes that were very much the French government's favored cause. There's like a rivalry that goes back between the U.S. government and the French government. You remember freedom fries and all of that. But for example, Mumia Abu Jamal.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. That was the case in the 90s, right? An African-American guy, former Black Panther, falsely accused of killing a police officer, etc. Well, the French government were the main people supporting that. And it's funny, I had a great conversation with somebody in Russia about this, and they said, oh, you don't know the half of it. But, there are streets named after Mumia Abu Jamal in Paris, right? The French government, they declared him a citizen of Paris at one point, right? And France, part of their international mission stated on the French, embassy's website is they want to abolish the death penalty in the United States, that France has been trying to do that. So they made Mumia Abu Jamal like the French government cause. And coincidentally, Bob Avakian's organization that's being directed from Paris, they focused on trying to free Mumia Abu Jamal, and they were one of the main organizers for that. And it looks like the RCP kind of became a front for French intelligence. And then, you remember freedom fries, they were against the Iraq war. But now France is a member of NATO, and France is, fully on board with the Ukraine thing. So, of course, they're against Russia and Ukraine, and they're condemning Russia, and they're, and they have Trump derangement syndrome, and they're trying to do their own version of no kings. What's wild is that France is particularly mad at Russia because Russia took their colonies away, right? Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, they were de facto colonies of France. They were officially independent, but they were under the domination of France, French troops there, etc. And then the military juntas that took power, the anti-imperialists, Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, now they're the Union of Sahel States, and they're building and constructing, and they're aligned with Russia. They kicked out the French. So the French are really mad at Russia right now. And it seems like the Revolutionary Communist Party that was directed from France for many, many years, with their leader living in France in exile under undisclosed terms, it seems like they are now trying to do their own version of no kings. And we'll see how it goes. What I thought was interesting, though, is that, they were really involved in Rise Up for Abortion Rights. That was the name of their group after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And they did some protests. AOC spoke at one of their rallies after Roe v. Wade was overturned. But then the mainstream media went after them. The Daily Beast and the Intercept all published hit pieces, said this is a cult. They compared them to Scientology, and they just ran their names through the mud. And Planned Parenthood even put out a statement saying the Revolutionary Communist Party and Rise Up for Abortion Rights are not welcome at any of our events and all of this. So they sucked up to the anti-Trump crowd, and they got canceled for it. And they just continue to suck up to the anti-Trump crowd. They're trying to do their own version of no kings. And so we'll see what happens in Washington, D.C. on November 5th. I think it's going to be a flop. I predict it's going to be a flop. But I think the reason that they're not allowed to be part of the Stop Trump coalition, right, is because they're foreign connected. I think that they're connected to France rather than American intelligence, and that the U.S. deep state doesn't need the Revolutionary Communist Party to oppose Trump. They've got Soros. They've got Letitia James, right? They've got the apparatus. But it's quite interesting to see that history there. And the French, I believe, part of the reason the left hasn't been standing with Russia is the French inserted themselves into a lot of the leftist parties after the fall of the Soviet Union during the 1990s. You know, the French had this policy that if you're a communist and you're accused of a crime, you can flee to France. And in Italy, the Red Brigades, which were terrorists that did bombings and assassinations, the French government, you know, gave them visas and said, yeah, you can stay here if you're a Red Brigade member. We won't extradite you. There's over 400 Red Brigade terrorists in France to this day who have not been extradited back to Italy. And that, you know, France had a policy of basically, if you're a communist and you're under threat, you can come there. And then they would cultivate them into being assets.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the Greek Communist Party is one of the biggest communist parties in Europe, and they didn't support Russia and Ukraine. And it turns out all their leaders studied in France for many decades, and, you know, there you go. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing there. And that's related to the years of lead. I talk a lot about the years of lead in Italy and how Italy was kept in NATO against the public will because the conservatives wanted to leave NATO and the left wanted to leave NATO, and they were going to form a coalition government, and bombing and terrorism and all kinds of weird, you know, intelligence intrigue created rivers of blood and confusion and kept Italy in NATO. And that we now know that was CIA, that was Operation Gladio. And it was creating a bunch of confusing political violence. Does that sound familiar? Confusing political violence where people don't know who's on what side, and people are afraid to go to political events because they might get shot. And, you know, communists are killing other communists, fascists are killing fascists, fascists are killing communists. No one knows who anybody is. And as a result, you know, the status quo just kind of wins, and Italy is still a member of NATO. And that was the years of lead. And I wrote, after the Luigi Mangione case, I wrote a book, The Danger of an American Years of Lead, because I feel like that's the strategy that the American government status quo has for America. They want to basically, they know the American public is against these wars. They know the American public wants to preserve our freedom. They know we want economic development. And so their only hope is to just make the dissident feelings that the American people have so jumbled and confused that they kind of win by default. You know, I read the book, The Handbook of Fourth Generation Warfare by William S. Lind, the Pentagon strategist. He's the guy who ran the surge in Iraq. And William S. Lind talked about how, you know, nowadays war is not fought usually directly between states, because then nuclear weapons go off and the world ends. And, you know, so war is often fought with non-state actors, you know, political movements, religious movements, etc. And that non-state actors fight war. And that when a government fights a non-state actor, the problem is the optics. And he talked about the story of David and Goliath, right? That, you know, the story of David and Goliath has been told for 4,000 years. Who's ever heard the story and sympathized with Goliath? Nobody, right? Everyone supports David, right? And so when a government is battling an insurgency, they have to work very hard to not make it a David and Goliath story. So what do? Well, you have Goliath back off, and then you make 5 or 6 different Davids who are fighting each other, and no one can tell who the real David is. And for 1 minute, it looks like this David is rising, and then it looks like that David is rising. And Goliath is just standing back saying, look, I just want to keep order here. I just want stability. And eventually, Goliath wins by default. That's how you defeat an insurgency. That's the strategies of William S. Lind and of Frank Kitson. That's how counterinsurgency is waged. And that's what I think the U.S. deep state is doing right now. And that's why I'm urging people to avoid political violence and to try and find common ground with people they disagree with.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one. And that's the thing about it. You know, you don't have to, I know people are like, oh, you're a pro-Trump. I'm not pro-Trump. I'm not anti-Trump. I'm not pro-Biden. I am opposed to imperialism. And I'm going to push back against imperialism. Trump's in office right now. I don't expect anything good from the imperialist. I don't want to get nuked.
Imagine
if somebody asked me this leading up to the election, what did people were like, oh, Trump, and I said, you can say all you want about both of them. I believe if Kamala Harris wins and her faction of the ruling elite is in charge, we're done. I truly believe that. I believed that we were done. The direction they were going, we were done. We were going to get nuked. And we've heard from Scott Ritter and others that there were people in Congress who said that they talked to him and said, you know, this is risking nuclear war. And that the answer from the Biden administration was, we're ready for that. So, we're still here, and we're going to continue to fight the good fight for ourselves, and we're not going to count on people in office to fix it. Something I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
The peace bridge. This
Yeah.
business about building a bridge or a tunnel or some
Right.
kind of a physical connection between the United States and Russia across the Bering Straits. I think the closest is about 25 miles, but you got some islands here. You got to hop from island to island. It would be expensive. And actually, I looked it up. Lyndon LaRouche came up with that idea. Did you know that?
Well, he wasn't the first one, but
Okay,
yeah,
but he
yeah.
pushed the first person that really pushed that was Lyndon LaRouche, instantly enough. But it's interesting that it's arising again. And whether well, it may or may not happen, I think it's a great discussion. I do think it would be a really good idea because when you start connecting physical connections between the two countries, then you can have people go back and forth. You can have lots of goods go back and forth. A lot of good things can happen. But at any rate, what you just came from Russia also. Was there any talk about it there? And your thoughts on this whole peace bridge thing?
Okay, well, the thing is, I mean, there's been talk of it for a long time. Now, Abraham Lincoln, one guy who was Abraham Lincoln's advisor, his economic advisor, was a guy named Henry Charles Carey. And look up Henry Charles Carey. This guy was amazing. He was an economist, and Karl Marx actually said he's the only American economist of any merit. He was the only American economist that Karl Marx had any respect for. And he wrote an anti-slavery. He wrote an anti-slavery pamphlet called Harmony of Interests, where he talked about how slavery was an extension of what he called the English system and imperialism. And he argued that we should develop the American system, which would be based on industry rather than bankers and economic development and having a national bank and such. And he proposed an idea he called the World Land Bridge. The idea was that the railways were very new. And after the Civil War was won, after Lincoln died, et cetera, Henry Charles Carey was saying, well, we need to build railroads, not just across the United States, but up through Canada, up through Alaska, and into Russia and China. And that can be a way to pivot the world away from the British Empire. And to have economic development and connect economic development in the heartland of Eurasia with economic development of the United States. And this was a big thing. Horace Greeley, who was the big abolitionist in New York City, his slogan was "Go West, young man, and grow up with the country," because the idea was the British Empire is about controlling trade routes and Atlanticism. Whereas we want an economy based on the land. So we want, westward expansion, obviously not good because of Native Americans, but in their minds, it meant having an economy based on the land and economic development rather than controlling the trade routes and colonialism in the British Empire and such. And that was a big part of what Abraham Lincoln pushed. And there were various proposals, and it was in the works, apparently, at the time of World War I. They had already started building it, and then World War I broke out, so they had to stop, right? And I believe World War I, they were starting to build something. But yeah, Lyndon LaRouche has pushed it. The Reverend Sun Young Moon also pushed it, and he went on a speaking tour in like the early 2000s. He went on a speaking tour across the Pacific. He went to the Philippines, he went to different places, and a member of the Bush family was with him. I think it was Neil Bush, who was like, George W. Bush's brother or something, was with him on the speaking tour. And the whole speaking tour was devoted to, building the bridge over the Bering Sea, or the tunnel, right? A tunnel is more practical, I think. People have said, because the ocean water, the way it is there, and that has been proposed, and that Henry Charles Carey's idea was that it would be part of just connecting the whole world, having highways or trainways that would just connect the entire world. And so I think it's a great idea, and I think it's something that we should promote. Part of the reason that I think it's particularly important to promote is because, the big thing is that the world right now is centered around Wall Street and London, right? We talk about unipolarity. That's what it is. Wall Street and London are the center of the world. Right. But if we develop in that direction, if we develop the western side of the United States, right, if we have more economic development in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest and California, right, that's pivoting our economy towards the Pacific away from the Atlantic. Right. And that's putting us closer to the rising economy in the East. The Belt and Road Initiative of China and all the economic development they're doing, the Eurasian Economic Union of Russia, it's pivoting us in a new direction. And that anything we can do to kind of pivot the United States away from that dying old colonial, system and toward the new world is a right step. And that something like that might seem kind of insignificant. It's like, all right, they built one bridge or whatever. But in order to build that bridge, American companies and Russian companies are going to have to collaborate. and they're going to get to know each other, and then they're going to have business relationships, and they're going to do other things. And China has said they will sponsor this bridge. In the 90s, China was a huge advocate of this bridge, and they were going around pushing for it. And Chinese companies would be involved, and American companies would be involved, and they would develop business relationships. And it's the kind of thing that it might seem like a mild thing in the moment, but it could be the kind of thing that kind of opens the floodgates of pivoting the United States away from the imperialist system and toward a multipolar world. And that we need to think of things like this. You know, what could be wrong with that? Having a bridge connecting Alaska to Russia, connecting America and Russia, giving us more access to the economic boom that's happening in the Russian Far East right now, because, you know, every year they have the Vladivostok Economic Forum in the far eastern parts of Russia. And, you know, I mean, it takes longer to fly from Moscow to Vladivostok than it does to fly from Moscow to New York City, right? It's Russia's really big if you look at a map, right? In the far east of Russia, they call it, that other end of Russia that's by Alaska, that's really, really far from Europe. And right now, all over those territories, farms are opening up because of global warming, right? Territory that you used to not be able to grow things on because it was too cold. Now you can grow things on. And there's a Russian farming boom happening. Russia's having the biggest wheat harvest you ever heard of. They're having the cattle, and they're really proud of their steak in Russia these days, right? They're making steak. They really want Americans to try their steak because they're doing beef steak, kind of like we do here in America, because they have domestic cattle in ways they didn't used to have it. And the idea is that if America could be connected to that, that would be a new market that we could be involved in. And you got China there, you got the Korean Peninsula. Little known fact, there is a trainway that goes from South Korea up into North Korea. And it was built during the 1990s as part of the Sunshine Policy. When South Korea was pivoting in a pro-North Korea, friendly to North Korea direction, they built this trainway, and it was supposed to go up into North Korea, through China, into Russia, all the way over to Poland, right, and connect with Europe. And that was the idea. And it was going to be called the Trans-Asian Railway System. People called it the Iron Silk Road. It was actually being constructed as part of the negotiation with North Korea. And that's when, Bill Clinton made a deal with North Korea that you don't get nuclear weapons, and we give you all this heating oil, and we help you set up peaceful nuclear energy. We build your nuclear power plants for you, and all of this in exchange for you not getting nuclear weapons. And things were looking very, very good until 9/11. And then 9/11 happened. And after 9/11, George W. Bush said, axis of evil. North Korea is the axis of evil. And Congress had already cut the funding. So North Korea didn't get the heating gas they'd been promised. And a lot of the promises from the Clinton administration were stopped by Congress. And at that point, North Korea said, fine, we said we wouldn't get nuclear weapons in exchange for you giving us all this stuff. You're not giving it to us. Now Bush just called us the axis of evil, and he lied to the world and said Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and then invaded them. I think we're going to get nuclear weapons. 2004, North Korea has nuclear weapons. And, that was one of the saddest things in Trump's first term, is that the train from South Korea, they had the first train go up into North Korea, and it was exciting. And it was the possibility that they could start, having train traffic and, business cooperation between, the two governments on the Korean Peninsula. But then it stopped. It just stopped. And who ruined it? Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, two people who betrayed Donald Trump. They're the ones that ruined it. And John Bolton was the most visible about ruining it, right? John Bolton was the one who said that, Libyan options are on the table. That's really a smart thing to say when you're about to meet with a world leader, right? Compare, the scenario, what happened with Gaddafi. That's not smart. And, John Bolton,
it was smart for him.
For him, yeah, he was trying to ruin it.
Because exactly. It was, at that time, Trump was trying to meet with, whether he'd have done it or not, I don't know, but he was attempting to meet with the leader of North Korea to get some kind of a deal with him, some kind of a handshake, at least some kind of a peace deal to improve relations with North Korea. That was Trump's plan. And they wanted to stop it at all costs. And the worst possible thing that they could think of to say is, we'll do you just like Libya. Remember Libya? They got rid of their weapons and we killed them. If you get rid of your weapons. So it was brilliant because it was evil, but it was the thing they could say to have the most detrimental effect to any possibility of making a deal. So it was, in an evil and horrific and unthinkable way, it was pretty smart, but yet terribly evil.
Yeah, and another little known fact, right, that didn't get any attention in American media is that, North Korea and Spain have diplomatic relations. They have embassies.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And shortly after, yeah, Franco, the
I
dictator
forgot
of,
about
of
that.
Spain, he established relations with North Korea, and that they have relations. And during the negotiations, the Spanish embassy, or the North Korean embassy in Spain, was broken into by all kinds of people who went in there and stole a bunch of computers and trashed the place and broke a bunch of stuff. And the Spanish government arrested people for doing it, and they were all people that were connected to the CIA. And it was in the Spanish press, mainstream press. CIA agents broke into the Spanish embassy, and they didn't get sent to jail for doing it or anything, right? They all, some deal was made. They went back to America or whatever. And so while Trump is trying to make a deal with North Korea, these people go and raid the North Korean embassy in Spain. These CIA American people go in there and raid the North Korean embassy. Like, it was clear the deep state just did not want that to happen. That was pretty clear. And my thinking about it, I've speculated before about what that was, and that it was because of the fact that, in the 1980s, a lot of the communist governments in Eastern Europe, right, Romania and Poland, they were making deals with America. They were privatizing things. They were getting loans from American banks. Bank of America, loaned a lot of money to Poland and Romania. And all of that eventually led to these countries having color revolutions and being overthrown, right? So then the US government assumed the same thing would happen in Asia, right? In Vietnam, they had their reform and opening up. A lot of American banks have done business in Vietnam. But today, the Vietnamese Communist Party is even stronger than it was before, right? And China, right? China had their reform and opening up, and everyone assumed that that would lead to a color revolution. And in 1989, they tried it with the Tiananmen thing. It was happening at the same time all the other color revolutions were happening, but it didn't work and it failed. And now the Chinese Communist Party is stronger. So at this point, it's looking like maybe that worked in Eastern Europe, but the strategy of bringing American investment into a country to overthrow the communists, that strategy doesn't work. Plus, the Vietnamese communists and the Chinese communists, there's a wing of them that are what you might call pro-American, or they don't care, right? It's just they'll take negotiations or whatever. China, when they pivoted toward getting investment from the United States, they were saying the Soviet Union was their main enemy because of the Sino-Soviet split, and that there's factions, at least in the communist parties of Vietnam and the Communist Party of China, that are pro-American. Not in North Korea. I mean, North Korea, there's like 4 million people died in the Korean War, right? And then there were deaths of malnutrition imposed on North Korea in the 1990s by the United States with the sanctions that, just devastated their country in the early 90s. North Korea, there's no pro-American faction of the North Korean or the Korean Workers' Party. And I think what John Bolton is afraid of is he's afraid that the reason the Communist Party of China is stronger is because they created an economic boom, right? They oversaw that. And I think John Bolton is afraid that if North Korea has an economic boom, the Korean Workers' Party will get stronger, and they'll also be able to spread their ideology around the world. And he doesn't want that. I think, though, the North Koreans are very admirable for their international solidarity. There's a beautiful, beautiful, if you can pull up a picture of it, the Monument of African Renaissance in Senegal. It's this beautiful statue to commemorate the 100th anniversary, I believe, of Senegal's independence, built by North Korea. They hired North Korea to build it. It's one of the most beautiful statues I've ever seen. It's, this really strong father holding up a baby and then holding his wife, right? And they're all like pointing upward and looking towards the future. It's one of the most beautiful statues I've ever seen. The Monument of African Renaissance, built by the North Koreans. Robert Mugabe's personal security guards for many years were North Koreans. He hired the North Koreans to be his, secret service.
Ibrahim Traore now. There's a contingent of North Korean special operations soldiers there in Burkina Faso that are assisting with the Russians, I think, are there, and the North Koreans are there. I think they got 700 people that they're protecting him.
Yeah, and there was a video going around YouTube a few years ago, and it was called Kim Jong-un's Palestinian daughter. And it's not literally his daughter, but it was this Palestinian young woman who grew up in North Korea, and that the Palestinians have gotten support from North Korea. And there's a number of Palestinians who live in North Korea. And that's one thing, they really try to present the North Koreans like they're racial supremacists and stuff like that. there are loads of Africans living in North Korea, and they were the biggest supporters of the Black Panther Party. The Eldridge Cleaver lived in North Korea. Eldridge Cleaver's daughter was born in North Korea. And the Black Panthers had a particular, they were supportive of all the communist governments, but they were particularly supportive of North Korea and the Juche ideology of North Korea. That's like, it pushes self-reliance. That really spoke to the Black Panthers. And that, you can read what Huey Newton and others wrote, particularly about North Korea. North Korea was particularly close to them because of the self-reliance Juche ideology. So North Korea has played a very important role in international anti-imperialism, and they're definitely not racial supremacists. And that was a really big push from Obama. Obama tried to push the idea they were racial supremacists. They published this book called The Cleanest Race that was widely circulated that said, they say that Koreans are the cleanest race or something. So that means that they think Koreans are the master race and they're Nazis or something. It's all absurd. The Korean people have been colonized and oppressed since hundreds of years ago.
Genocided, you can't leave that out.
Yeah, by Japan and then by the United States and all of that. And they have pride in their heritage, but they stand in solidarity with people all over the world. So, that it's just a misrepresentation, just completely a misrepresentation.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly agree with that. And what's interesting now is that North Korea, which demonized, Americans are so propagandized that they could actually teach people that North Korea is somehow a threat to the United States. Absurd. But I think that it's very important. The alliance between North Korea and Russia is very important. And I think it's wonderful that the Russians brought North Korea into their fold. Apparently, they're providing a lot of weaponry from North Korea, which is defensive. I believe it's defensive. This idea about North Korea, the United States, North Korea is a threat. Why, we're threatening people all over the world. Show me one country that North Korea has ever threatened to invade or attack or anything. Zero, none, ever. So clearly, if you're looking at a country like North Korea that has never attacked anyone, never threatened to attack anyone, has only used defensively, then you have to say that their weaponry is defensive.
Yeah.
Because from a perspective of practical application, the only thing they've ever applied their weaponry for is defensive purposes. They've never applied their weaponry for offensive purposes. So I have to say, I'm glad they have more weaponry to use for defensive purposes, because their history clearly shows that they're only going to act in a defensive manner.
Yeah, Bruce Cummings is the most well-respected Korean history scholar in the United States. He lives in Illinois. I think he's at the University of Illinois. I remember he came to my college to speak when I was a college student in Ohio, and I was just so excited to see a pro-North Korean guy. I actually got to have dinner with him. And I remember I asked him, what about all these reports in American media that, it was Kim Jong-il at that time. Kim Jong-il, has the world's largest collection of pornography and claims he invented the hamburger. And he says, I get called frequently by ABC and NBC and Fox wanting me to confirm stories like that. And I always say to them, how would I know anything like that? And then he always says, what's your source on it? And they say, it's an anonymous source from the South Korean military. And there's no evidence of any of these stories, right? And like the latest, at one point, I remember a few years back, they ran the story, North Korea believes in unicorns. And it was claiming, North Korea is such a silly country, they believe in unicorns. Actually, what the story was that in North Korea, they did an agricultural dig or a archaeological dig, and they found a tomb. Right. And the tomb had an inscription on it that had a story about unicorns in it. That's fascinating. That's great. And that doesn't mean they believe in unicorns. The other thing was that, the latest one, this is the latest smear on North Korea I've seen going around. Kim Jong-un is having a crackdown on boob jobs. Did you see that? Right. Yeah. Well, if you actually read the story, it actually, I think, makes perfect sense. Kim Jong-un said, look, we have limited resources in our country, and some of the more higher up women in the party have been going to get boob jobs. You can't do that. Can't do that. That's not a good use of our resources. We're better than that. We're a developing country. And, if you're in the party, you got to spend your money on stuff people actually need. And he just said, we're not doing that. We're not doing plastic surgery in North Korea. That's all that happened. It was just a comment that he made, which I think is actually very defensible. And they've blown it up. The North Korean police are inspecting women's boobs. And all. No, they're not. Like, come on, and they just lie. Years ago, I saw they had a story that it's illegal in North Korea for women to ride bicycles. That was a story they claimed. And so somebody went to North Korea and they stood on a street corner and they just filmed all the women riding bicycles. And in fact, not only do North Korean women ride bicycles, North Korean women have won Olympic gold medals in boxing over and over and over again. North Korean women are not, it's just ridiculous how they just, North Korea is one country they will just lie about excessively. And I don't know why. I think it's partly the anti-Asian racism. If they wouldn't lie this way about Fidel Castro, they wouldn't lie this way about the old Soviet Union. They feel like they can just say anything about North Korea. And there is that old racist trope about Asiatic despotism that was used, and I think it's partially that. So, but yeah, most of what we think we know about North Korea is just not consistent with reality. North Korea is a country that's locked down and, has been locked down for, 60, 70 years. And, but they're ready to fight. So there you go.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at is a changing world wherein countries that have been downtrodden, countries that have been victim of imperialism now, and the perfect example is Russia, North Korea. As Russia grows, it's going to ally with other countries that need to grow, that benefit it, and they can benefit each other. North Korea has an optimum, a strategic geopolitical position in the world. A geographical position is important. So if you look at it all, it's great. It's greatly beneficial to Russia to have a strong ally in that region, right on the Chinese border. Again, it kind of makes it more difficult for Japan to get froggy, as they say. They got to be looking right over there like there's North Korea aimed at us with nukes and everything else. Maybe we better hesitate. You want to make Japan hesitate with their fascist history. Our friends are Japan and Germany. You know what I mean? Think about it. Hey, let's put the band back together. Japan and Germany.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so I think that things are going in a good direction there. The other thing, I did want to ask you about your trip to, if you could talk about your trip to Russia, what you saw, what you think about it, what's being said about Russia here versus what you saw when you were there.
Well, I went to the 20-year anniversary gala of RT, and it was really an honor to be there. And if I were to start naming all the amazing people that were in that room, we would be here for the rest of the night. And honestly, there were probably a lot of amazing people I don't even know about. I mean, there was thousands of people at this gathering, and RT is in many different languages. So it was, there were all kinds of people from Asia, all kinds of people from the Muslim world. But, I know people in the West, in the English-speaking world. Rafael Correa, the president of Ecuador, was there. He was there. George Galloway, friend of yours, friend of mine, he was there.
Yeah, I did a show last Sunday.
Yeah.
In fact, because it was. Did you see Steven Seagal?
Yeah, he was there.
I saw a picture of Scott Ritter, Larry Johnson, and Steven Seagal at dinner.
Yeah. And, it was just a lot of the people that do the news that, you and I have done interviews with over the years and stuff like that. It was just great to see people. Peter Lavelle, ran into him, and we had a great chat about different things. And, it was really great to be there. And the Russian president came and he gave a speech about the importance of RT, about the importance of challenging the media narratives, and then, he ended by, you're going to deploy your most secret, effective weapon, the truth. That was the big line. And so, and then Margarita Simonyan, who's the leader of RT, the celebration was going to be in December, but they moved it up because she just started chemotherapy, so she's having some very serious health issues. So it was really great to see her there. And she looked great. She looked like she was in great health, and then after the ceremony, after the ceremony with the president, then we got to watch the ballet. And the ballet was it was a Pushkin, a novel by Alexander Pushkin that they turned into a ballet with Tchaikovsky music. And it was great. And it was a little Halloween-y, though. It was a little dark. And the ballet, it was about a young man who's obsessed with gambling, a young rich kid who's obsessed with gambling. And he meets this old woman who's at the gambling clubs, who's real. She always has the right card. And so he goes to her house with a gun and demands she tell him his secret, and she won't give it to him. And there's like a scuffle and she dies. Right. So then he goes back to gamble and her ghost starts haunting him as he's gambling. And he eventually then kills himself. And it's a really dark story,
Yeah.
But, you know, I wondered why they picked that of all things. It may just be that's what was on at the Bolshoi. But I also wondered if that was kind of a message to the West. Like, we're addicted to gambling. We're addicted to war. We're addicted to, all, you know, profit and all of this. And it was like, you know, the West, we can either join a multipolar world or we can, you know, go down like this gambling addicted young man in the Pushkin novel did. Maybe that's what they were saying. But I will say the lights and the music, I mean, it was really, really beautiful. It was really, really a great show. And it was really great to be there, and to be there with so many great people, and it's just a real honor to be in the room there. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm glad to see RT's doing what they're doing, and you know, yeah, that's all I can say. Yeah.
Wow, what was the city like? What was Moscow like? I hear it's beautiful. I hear it's a lot of traffic. You know, we're told they've got no gasoline, everything's been blown up, but there's traffic everywhere. So what you see? What were the sights like in Moscow? What's it like?
Well, I'll say this, you know, I expected that it would be really cold. It was actually warmer in Moscow when I was over there than it is in New York City right now, you know, so it
Wow.
wasn't super cold. And it wasn't snowing, you know, it's late October, but it wasn't snowing. You know, and I don't know, I mean, everything just seemed pretty normal, you know. People are there. There's young people at the universities that are studying. There's a lot of Americans who live there. I didn't know this, but there are like American colonies in Russia now. Do you know about this? Of like, you know, like cities of Americans who've just moved there, right? I did not know this, but you know, there's so many Americans. There's Americans who moved there. They have whole like little American villages in parts of Russia.
Wow.
I had no idea about that. And that Russia really wants people to move there. That's a big thing. They have this traditional values visa, and a lot of Roman Catholics and conservatives from across Europe are moving there. You know, so, you know, a lot of Americans have moved there, especially since the Trump election. I had no idea, but it's like many thousands of Americans now live in Russia, which I think is fascinating. I had no idea about that. So that was interesting to me. I wasn't aware. And yeah, I mean, and Russia, you know, it's a very diverse place. You have very, very conservative Russian Orthodox people. You have the communists, people that are very proud of the Communist Party. You've got young hipster people that live in the cities that, you know, are, you know, into LGBT and nightclubs and dancing. You know, you've got Muslims, more Muslims than any other non-Muslim country in the world, right? A large Muslim population. Muslims actually vote for Putin at a higher rate than Christians do. Did you know that? The Muslim regions are strongholds of Putin's support because Putin's socially conservative. And on top of that, those regions that are the more poorer regions, they depend on support from the Russian central government, right? Putin's brought economic stability to, you know, a lot of the Islamic regions. So Muslims in Russia vote for Putin at an even higher rate than the Christians do. So I don't know. I mean, Russia is full of surprises. You know, everything that you assume about Russia, you know, when you get there, it's not what you would think, you know. You see there's a lot of buildings that are still the Soviet architecture, but there's a lot of new buildings as well. And they've preserved it. It's an interesting mixture. You know, the capital in Moscow, they have a mixture. On the one hand, they have a lot of like the old Soviet monuments, like a big statue of Karl Marx, a big statue of Lenin here. So they're proud of that, right? We were told that they tore down all the statues in the 90s. That's not true. A lot of them are still up, and they keep them and they maintain them. And there's also a lot of, you know, Tsarist and Orthodox statues, right? A lot of statues of great knights and great, you know, great religious figures. And, you know, the Moscow, right? You know, the legend of St. George and the dragon, like Moscow, the city of Moscow, their emblem is St. George fighting the dragon. And I don't quite know why that is. I can never find anyone who can tell that to me about that why. But you know, St. George is kind of the patron saint of Moscow. St. George who fought the dragon. And there's statues of St. George. There's the crest of Moscow with St. George on it. You know, so it's a mixture of like, you know, medieval, classical and religious architecture and statues and Soviet era stuff. And it's a beautiful blend. Right. It's a beautiful blend. Russia is in a place that it just doesn't make sense to us as Westerners. Right. You know, we try to make sense of politics, and I get frustrated with the left and the right. You know, I get a lot of young people that are like woke and think they're communists, and then they think, oh, Russia's like me. And I'm like, no, they're not. No, they're not. You know, Russia is not. But then I get a lot of conservatives, a lot of Trumpers who are like, oh, Russia, you know, they know how bad the communists are. I'm like, no, they're not. They're really proud of their Soviet history, and Soviet nostalgia is at an all-time high. And Stalin is wildly popular now in Russia. Like 71% of people say Stalin had a mostly positive role in their history. So if you go over to Russia and you start spouting American anti-communism, people are going to look the other way. People don't appreciate that. It doesn't fit our Western narrow political understanding. And China's the same way. In China, Confucius is wildly popular, and so is Mao. And that they have found elements of their unique past that is not Western. And they have combined them into kind of a new political synthesis. And this is why I do recommend people check out Alexander Dugin's Fourth Political Theory, right? Not to endorse everything he says necessarily, but his writing about what he calls the Fourth Political Theory will help you understand where the BRICS world is at, because it's not left, it's not right, it's different. It's not Western. You know what I mean? And it's one strand, I would say, that all throughout the BRICS world, they're collectivist. They believe human beings have an obligation to each other. And in economics, that's socialism, right? That people should be cared for, the government should, run the economy. But in social questions, that often means conservatism, traditional families and religion and things like that. And it's just, outside of the West, there is a new world that's thriving, and we can't explain it with our narrow American political understanding. And that's what I urge people to do. Be open-minded. And if you visit Russia, you visit China, you visit Iran, go there to learn. That's what I urge people to do.
And if you notice, they, with the faces in both ways, and of course, some other people mentioned that I have on a Duran, one of my caps that I got from the Alexander McCoy Duran, and that is the crest. You right? That is the drag again, the head, the facing in both ways, and the what is that? An eagle or some kind of a bird? I forgot what kind of bird it is. And the wings. That is the Duran's crest. That is it. It's the St. George dragon thing going on.
Yeah.
And yes, so that some people said, is that the Duran? Yes. And that's where they get, obviously, clearly where they got that from.
There you go. Yeah.
Yep. But at any rate, before we go, I do want to show everybody this. It's something that, oops, CPIUSA.org, right?
Yep, that's my organization.
Yeah, well, what do you know? And we've got it. So before we go, let's show everybody the Center for Political Innovation. Caleb Maupin, what do we need to know about the Center for Political Innovation? Peace with Russia, peace with China, no World War III, no police state. Caleb.
Yeah, well, our slogan is we need a government of action to fight for working families. And we are always doing great work. This weekend, we disrupted the No Kings rallies to say hands off Venezuela. And one of our members in Minneapolis, Penny, she went there all by herself with a bullhorn, and she interrupted Keith Ellison. She interrupted all. I mean, you should watch the video. It's amazing. And she did it all by herself with the camera and everything. It was like she was like a one-person band almost. And our members in Chicago, they were out in the streets, saying no war with Venezuela. Our members in LA were out there. We had people in Iowa. We had people in Joshua Tree, California. It was really great that we were able to pull off this intervention. The next big thing CPI is doing is January 11th. We are going to have an event in New Jersey. So we'll be announcing that very soon. You'll be able to register on the website to come to that. It's going to be very exciting. We're going to give some awards to some local New Jersey activists that I've known for years that are important folks, and we're going to announce our plans for the next year. We did publish the convention that we had this summer. We published a coffee table book, full color, of the convention with all the speeches transcribed. And so everyone who comes to our January 11th event will get one of these for free. So that's going to be exciting. The other thing is, next 2 weeks from now, I'm headed to Washington, D.C. for the Black is Back March by the Uhuru movement that's taking place. And I'm going to be there in D.C. I'm very honored to be a guest speaker at that march. And, I'll get to see Chairman O'Malley and Penny Hess and Jesse Neville, the Uhuru Three, once again. And we continue their legal battle continues, and they're launching very soon a campaign to overturn the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And we're just proud to work with them. The Uhuru are absolutely awesome folks. So yeah, we're doing a lot of different things. And yeah, January 11th will be our kickoff event for 2026. So keep an eye out for the announcement, sign up, and come join us for a day of, it'll be a banquet, basically. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be good. So there you go.
All right. Looking forward to that. Looking
Always
forward
a
to that.
pleasure to stream with you, with you, Garland. It's really great. You know, it really is. And you know, you're in DC, and I know you've been, you know, packing up and doing different things, but you're doing great work. And you know, everyone loves your channel. I just got to tell you that. And people asked about you in Russia. I will say that. People said, "Oh,
Wow.
Garland Nixon. Oh, we watch him. We love him." You know, many people that I shook hands with in Russia were RT people. Oh, Garland. We love Garland. So you know, you've got fans on the other side of the world, and you've got a lot of fans over here. I know for a fact. So there you
Well,
go.
thanks a lot. I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to going to Russia. So looks like I'm getting close. The 6th of January. So I'll have to check with you about the Black is Back. Which we'll call that's November 1st. I'll still be here. I got a lot going on, as you know, right now in my private life between my back, you know, giving me a fit. I had that sciatica, and
Ooh,
that can be a problem, you know.
yeah.
That's
Okay.
the only real health problem is my sciatica, and that came from a 1987 Chevy Suburban. A
Ooh.
91-year-old man ran a red light. I was driving my police car, running about 65. Okay, it was a 50-mile, 5-mile-an-hour zone, but hey, who's counting? And a 91-year-old man in a 1987 Chevy Suburban blew through a red light in front of me, and I hit him. I just saw a flash. I hit that car so hard, I smashed my car all the way back to the windshield. And you know what? I'm going to do this. I have a picture. Let's see if I can show it to you. Let's see if we can see it.
Oh, wow.
Can you see it?
That's a car accident. Wow.
That was my police car from the accident that I'm paying for with the blood of my back to this very day.
Ooh.
And I didn't think much of it. So anybody out there who has accidents and people are like, "Oh, you're just trying to get money," yeah, whatever. If you're young and you have an accident, when you get in started hitting my 40s, and I'm like, what in the world's going on back here? And the doctors were like, yeah, remember when literally, I had a broken back. I was off work 9 months.
Wow.
And they said, well, when you get a little older, you start getting, what do you get? Different things in deterioration, and then it turns into sciatica, and then you're hobbling around. And other than that, I'd be great. I'd be running track right now. Well, not exactly, but you know what I mean. But I deal with that, and it is what it is. Yeah. And who cares about my problems? Everybody's got problems of their own. But my point is, I'm going to Russia.
All right. Well, have a great trip. Have a great trip, and be sure to take some video while you're there. You know.
Yes.
So. Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And yeah, folks can also tune into my YouTube channel. I'm always streaming. I stream as much as I can. So, oh, you got, wow. Is that a GoPro?
GoPro.
Okay.
And I even got this thing, whatever this is, the little handle that it goes on that has the extra battery. So I am ready. All right, brother. I am ready. And I want to thank it. You know why I was able to get that to go to Russia? Because people go to buy me a coffee. They go to Patreon, they do things like that, and they contribute to the channel. And that allows me, when I'm going to Russia, to have a GoPro. Isn't that nice? Thanks, everybody. Yep. Caleb, don't forget, everybody, cpiusa.org. Go there and check out what Caleb's doing. Thank you very much. The most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.